Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Gruver. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Welcome to another episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. I'm your co-host, Jason Mefford.
And I'm Kathy Gruver. And I don't know why I did that.
I don't know, but we got the fingers going today.
Ooh. All right, well, that was it. Thanks for joining.
All right, we got that out of the way. Here we go.
So, Jason, have you ever had a situation where you hear that something has changed, or you hear that there's been a new rule put in place, or like something is happening and you're like, oh my God, that's terrible. We can't let that happen. And so you fight to change it. And then you find out the whys of why that was put into place in the first place. And you suddenly go, oh, that's what, okay. And once you have the whole story, you recognize that maybe that is a pretty good idea, or maybe we did have to make that change. Do you ever have that happen?
I've had that happen. In fact, I've been on both sides of that. Okay, so I know we're going to get into it because I think, sometimes I'm going to use the word judge, right? The clarity maybe at which somebody makes a decision when we don't have all the facts.
Yeah. So
I've had that both, just employer, employee kind of side of it, right? Where I've been on the one side where there were changes that were made and I'm thinking, what the hell? Why is this, right? But I didn't have all of the facts. And I've been on the other side, right, where I was the person that was in the meetings. I had the facts, but I couldn't share or explain some of the reasons behind the decisions and how you have to sometimes deal with that, on the other side of people saying, look, I don't understand what you're doing. I know, but just trust me. They're like, but I don't want to trust you.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you, but I can't tell you. Just trust me, right? And so, yeah, I think that happens a lot where we kind of jump to conclusions about why things are the way they are. And maybe even sometimes, it goes back to a little bit of the stories that we're telling ourselves, because that's probably what's happening too, right? Is that every person is telling themselves certain stories without actually knowing the bigger picture of the whole story and being able to see all the other sides of it as well.
Well, and so often there's a reactivity that comes with that. That's unfair. I can't believe. Oh, that's why. Oh, okay, then. Or, you hear of a couple splitting up and you're like, oh my God, how could you ever leave this nice guy? He's so sweet. He provides for the family. Well, he was a raging alcoholic and threw me down the stairs. Oh.
Yeah.
And there's
always two sides to every story.
His, hers, and what actually happened, and sometimes there's more than that. And this was kind of, the reason everyone at home that we're talking about this is I'm serving on a board now, and we had our first big board meeting. And so of course we were clueless as to the backstory of so many things that had changed. And it was so fascinating to sit in this meeting and someone to raise a point of, we really should change that. And I don't know, can we make this? And then maybe the GM or somebody else went, well, here's why that change was made. And then everybody went, oh, or so many times you could see people going, oh, okay. And they'd start to write stuff down because we recognize the backstory of why that change was made, or we recognize why we can't let's just waive all those fees. We recognize why we couldn't do that. And so it was just, to me, fascinating, being that I love communication and human behavior. Mm-hmm. Board meeting, perfect place to see all that, right? To just see the responses. And it was nice because everybody was civil and we all responded to each other, right? We all, you could see us agreeing and going, oh, okay, I get that now. No one fought it. Nobody pushed it. Nobody was a jerk. Nobody got reactive. There was no yelling. No one threw paper. No staplers went flying across the room. It was so exciting for me to see a room full of adults actually having an open-minded, psychologically safe, and that was one of the things I stressed at the very beginning of the meeting, psychologically safe conversation to toss out ideas, and build on each other's ideas. And if one was like, no, that's not good, why, but how can we take that? It was so exciting to see. And but getting the whole story, knowing the backstory to things was incredibly enlightening. And I just started to think, how often are we trying to make changes or reacting to things where we actually don't know what's going on?
Well, I think it's interesting because as you were talking there, I was thinking there were two phrases, and you actually said them too, right? Is the backstory. Well, you got to kind of know the backstory to understand where you're at, right? Or there's the old Paul Harvey. My brother used to listen to Paul Harvey all the time, right? And now for the rest of the story, right? Kind of a
Right,
thing.
exactly.
Because he kind of tell you, one part, and then he'd kind of go back and he'd tell you the rest of the story, so you could actually understand why it's that way. And as you were talking, I was even thinking, it's, I mean, very tangible in something like a board meeting, right? Where especially if you've never seen behind the curtains, and all of a sudden the curtains are pulled back, you're like, holy fuck, I didn't know that, right? But how much of that time that even translates over into our personal life and the relationships that we have with other people. Somebody does something or somebody doesn't do something, and we're very quick to kind of judge. But how much of the time when we understand, oh, that's why Kathy responded that way. Now I remember, right? Maybe this experience that she had earlier on in life. And now I understand why Kathy responded that way. In fact, I might have responded that way as well.
Right.
A lot of times my wife and I were watching movies or doing stuff, and then I'm, like I'm Google searching all the stuff, what really happened, what didn't, because we like a lot of the movies that are, based on real life. And it's like, well, what really happened, what didn't? And I know a lot of times we try to put our, we just having a conversation, we'll say something like, well, what would you have done if you were in that situation? And so much of the time I come back to myself and I'm like, I don't know. It's like we can sit here and judge that person for doing what they did, but unless you have gone through what they have gone through, unless you have seen what they have seen, it's pretty hard to know exactly what you would do. So maybe instead we just remove the judgment that we have on people and just realize people are just people. They're just doing the best they can. And there's probably some good reason, or at least some justification they have for why they're doing what they're doing.
Or maybe it wasn't malicious. Maybe it was just ignorant. They didn't recognize that they're standing in the doorway. They didn't recognize that they when they parked, they had moved over the line because the car next to them had moved over the line because the car next to them moved over the line. It's like, I remember so often having this conversation with my ex where we'd pull into a parking lot and be, what a jerk, look at how he parked. I said, well, could you consider that maybe when he pulled in, there was a big car next to him and he had to park that way? No. Okay, well, then the conversation's over. It's like, let's consider other things. It was interesting when you were talking about the TV show thing. Eric and I started watching for a while a TV show called Manifest, and it's on Netflix. And the premise of it is a family's at the airport, and two of them decide to take the $600 voucher and take a later flight, right? So half the family goes home, half the family gets on this other flight later. And their flight lands and they get off the plane and there's all these police and all this da 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 da. Well, the flight disappeared and showed up 10 years later. Ooh. So the family that had gone home never saw their husband and son again, thought they had died in some mysterious crash, and 10 years later they show up. Well, now the twin of the son is 10 years older. All his possessions are gone. All the cars are gone. The pets are dead. The relationships have moved forward, of course, because if your husband is dead, you're now in a different relationship. But then your husband shows up looking 10 years younger. And it just raised all these questions. And I mean, it was like stressing Eric and I out, because it's like, what would you do? Like, if I assume you're dead and gone, I'm moving on. I'm not going to be living in Santa Barbara. I'm probably going to have a new partner. And then you show up and I still love you because it was a mind fuck. And we got, I think, like halfway through the first season, got distracted with something else. But it's like, it did raise these questions of what would you do in these situations? And I realized we've gotten so far off the topic of what we started talking about, which was that, getting the backstory. But how do you respond to these things, right? Taking other people's experiences and their information into account. It's a fascinating, sort of psychological question.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we've talked a little bit about before too, right? So if we try to make this a little bit practical for people as well, right, is what if instead of automatically judging, we become more curious?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's exactly what it is. Yep.
We start asking questions and we think, the same thing, like that. Okay. Yeah. If you were put in that situation where you thought your partner was dead, and it's been years, well, of course, you probably would move on. I mean, that would be normal under that particular situation, right? And so, again, maybe just leaning into being more curious about it, asking questions, trying to understand. I mean, that's what you were talking about, with the board meeting.
Yeah.
Is, something comes up and somebody's like, well, why are we doing that? Right. And again, we'll see how curious they were, but obviously from asking a question, you're a little bit curious. Then you start to understand the backstory. Then you start to hear it. Then you've got a different context, right? Because again, just somebody from the outside looking in without all of the context, we don't understand, and we can't possibly understand what's going on, especially if we just come in at a certain point, right? And
oh yeah, absolutely.
Again, here's kind of a crazy thing, but it was a show that we watched a long time ago. I don't even remember what it was, but it was a point to where, again, imagine if you come in and all of a sudden all you see are two men, one that's sitting on the ground, another one that is hovering over the top of them. The one man picks up a handgun and hands it or points it to the other one and shoots him in the heart. Now, if you just came into the story at that point, you would think, my gosh, you just killed a man. How could you do that? You murderer, you killer, you go off the line, right? Now, the backstory and watching that movie, you saw that to where, the man on the ground was mortally wounded already. He was going to die. The other person had to leave them behind because I believe there was fire, there was some other stuff going on. And so, at that point, it's, do you let this man die from fire, or when he asks you to put him out of his misery, is that the right thing to do? We just saw Last of the Mohicans again, and there's a scene like that in the end where the one man is being burned alive and the other character kills him, so he doesn't have to suffer through that. So again, it's like, what part of the story are you seeing? And if you don't see the whole story, it's easy to judge. And unless we're curious and try to understand more about that person or about the storyline, it's really hard to know why somebody did it, because it goes back to their intention. The intention was, to do what the person wanted, to, help serve them, not to, murder this person.
Somebody, right? Well, it's every zombie movie, right? One of the heroes gets bitten, and he's gonna turn, so we have to kill. I mean, it's like we just watched a zombie movie about that. It had that same situation. It's like, yay, we got out alive, and then one goes, oh no, and you're like, oh shit, Bob's gonna be a zombie in a second, and you have to kill him, or else he's gonna eat you. A struggle we face every day. Let's face it. One of the questions that I love asking people, and this comes from the coaching realm. Someone in the meeting yesterday started to bring up a subject that was clearly so charged for them and so personal to them, and we didn't understand why. Like, why are you bringing that? Like, why do you keep fighting for this? And so the question that I asked was, why is this important to you? Like, why does this clearly means a lot to you? Why is that? And understanding that person's intention of why they wanted to keep bringing up that point, it enlightened the group. It's still not a thing that's going to get solved anytime soon, but it was like, but why is that important to you? Why is that something that you feel strongly about? And so often we get reactive to their passion or their pushiness or their enthusiasm, or it's like, geez, calm down. It's like, but it's clearly important. So asking that curious question of, why is that important to you? Why is that something you'd like to see changed? I think is one of those questions just in real life that I love asking people, because so often they don't know. And, we should change this. Well, why?
I don't know. We should change it.
Or why is that important to you? Well, I realize it's unjust and I think we should make the change for justice. Okay, well, that's at least an answer, and we can go about it from a different place. If you don't know why you're fighting for something, then think about your own intent. Think about your own backstory with that. Sometimes we just get something in our head that we want it to happen, but we don't actually understand why or the ramifications of what would happen if we actually did that thing. So it's a question to ask yourself as well as the people around you.
Yeah. Well, and because, again, understanding why it's important to them, and what the intention behind it really is. Because I think, again, I've done a lot of work in the ethics space, and to me, ultimately, again, what, two different people could view a particular act as either ethical or unethical. But to me, more than anything, what determines whether something is ethical or not comes back to the intention.
Sure.
And so that's where, again, it's understanding, being curious about why are things a big deal for people, because again, sometimes maybe there's some trauma, maybe there's some experience or other things that have happened in their life that then when you understand, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? Like even some person parking crazy, you've seen some of those people where they'll like take up 2 spots, and it's like, why would you do that? Well, maybe, right, they had a nice car that they loved and somebody dinged them, or I don't know, right?
Maybe they're just a dick.
That could be it.
I mean, just to play contrary, because it's
and don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick. Yeah. Unless your name is Dick, and then
be Dick.
Yeah. And if your friend's a zombie, you got to take them out. I mean, there's no saving them. Yeah. I don't know quite how we got to that, but
actually, I don't know, but it's good for a laugh, and laughing is good as well, right? So there you go.
It's good. Okay, so to bottom line this, which is the other thing I had to ask a lot of people to do. It's like circle and circle. Bottom line this for me. What were we talking about? Bottom line this for me. Knowing the backstory, right, and not getting reactive to things, and being open-minded to hearing the reasons behind things, the whys behind things, and getting the full story before you go off half-cocked, as my mom used to say. So yeah, I mean, so that was basically the point of today, is talking about that. And we've talked about jumping to conclusions before. This goes along with that. This is sort of a slightly different color of that. But yeah, really finding out all the facts and the backstory before you go off half-cocked.
Yeah. And so next time, so this week, as you're thinking about this, as you're going forward, there's going to be things that are going to trigger you. You're going to pull into the parking lot. Somebody's going to have parked crazy. It's going to trigger you. So at that point, when you feel triggered and all these emotions want to start coming up and you want to start judging, just take a pause for that 8 seconds and let your subconscious catch up and think, maybe is there a backstory that I'm not hearing? Is maybe their intention different than what I'm jumping to a conclusion about? And just start asking yourself some of those questions, be curious, and just relax and let it go. And that's your homework for this week.
Yeah. Ask those questions and get the backstories, especially if it's a situation where you're at your office or you're on a board and some decision has been made, and try to find out the whys before you get reactive to it. It was just such an enlightening thing to get to hear the reasoning behind so many things that we all went, why would we do that? Oh, that's why we do that. Okay. No, that makes sense now. All right, cool. Good. I'm good with it. Patience. Yes. And go get the zombies.
Go with the zombies.
All right. Hey, I think we kind of did a circle thing here. Awesome. So go out, try not to be, if you find yourself triggered, take that breath, take that pause, as Jason said, find out the whys, ask those questions, be curious rather than impatient. And I'm Kathy Gruver. I can be reached at kathygruver.com.
And I'm Jason Mefford. I can be reached at jasonmefford.com. So go out, have a great week, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. See ya.